A lot of us are, again, in these economic times, keeping our cars a little bit longer. And in doing that, there are some things that we haven't necessarily prepared for in the past. Maybe we never really reached that mileage threshold that would have necessitated the need to start thinking about additional things that you would be concerned about as you, for an example, broke 100,000 miles on a vehicle. Here to talk to us about things you should know if you're keeping your car a little bit longer than you did in the past is Tom O'Donnell, owner of Preferred Auto Care in Reno. Tom, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Mitch.
I was just mentioning people are keeping their cars, and the problem is that people may already know that at certain intervals they may have to do a timing belt or something like that. But there's a lot of things that come up that they really should take a closer look at, especially if they're getting to that or breaking that 100,000 mile threshold on their odometer. Let's take a moment, if you will, and talk about some of the things that they should be concerned about at that time on their car.
Well, mostly when you start getting higher miles on your car, you could do all your maintenance and everything could be all up to date. And that stuff's all good, but you have to pay close attention to wearing components. It could be like suspension components, shocks, struts. Those aren't normal maintenance interval replacement parts.
And so it requires an inspection to determine where those are. And unfortunately, I think that a lot of times people take their car in just for that regular service. They'll tell a shop, I'm here for an oil change, and that's all they get. And those inspections are not necessarily done. And we were talking, one of the things that you recommend at 100,000 miles is that somebody actually has a qualified shop to do a full inspection of a vehicle. And we're going to get to that inspection, but you mentioned that whole process in just a minute. You mentioned suspension components, and this was a conversation we were having, and one I thought that our community should hear. Suspension components like ball joints, and if you will, here's just one of those things that I think the typical automotive consumer may not really understand what it is, what it does, and what can happen if it's neglected. So if you would start describing what a ball joint is on a vehicle.
Well, a ball joint it's connected to the lower control arm on the front, and it's also connected to the steering knuckle. And the reason it's a ball joint is because the wheels have to turn back and forth, so you need a pivot point. Well, this pivot point is a ball in a socket. And with time and age, the ball and socket start to wear. Well, the ball's retained inside the socket, and what can happen with age, the ball can actually wear out the socket and pop off.
Oh, so you can create some inner socket wear, and the ball can actually, by friction, reduce in size. And then when it was actually originally manufactured, there was no way for it to come out. But as those components both deteriorate with that friction and the wear, and 100,000 miles is a considerable amount of that, turning in every bump and every right and left turn you take, that this can actually pop out over a bump, for an example.
Oh, yes.
And what happens if this does pop out? I mean, I don't want to frighten people, but I want them to realize this is something they should inspect. I want them to know what the risks are of neglect.
Well, we've seen them pop out on probably, I'd say, 10 occasions. And it's pretty ugly. Well, what happens is when the ball pops out of the socket, basically the front wheel just comes loose, and it can ruin the axles, front drive axles, because it's shifting them back. It could ruin the fender. If you were going at a high rate of speed, who knows what could happen. It could be catastrophic.
And it could be, dangerous, and for you and the other vehicles around you. And again, I think this is one of those things that even the person that does their own oil changes may not be looking at, may not even be thinking about, because again, maybe they didn't keep a car past 100,000 miles before. So if you would take a moment and describe that inspection process, and I understand it's different on different makes and models. But for an example, you work on, let's just share the makes that you actually provide services on.
No, we specialize on Hondas and Acuras, Toyotas and Lexus, and Subarus. Now, the inspection process, lots of times, most people think when the car's sitting on the ground, you can grab the top of the wheel and try to shake it back and forth and feel movement if it's worn out. But in most cases, that's not true, because the weight of the vehicle's pushing the ball into the socket and you can't feel anything. So you can do it that way, but you should also raise it up in the air, take all the weight off of it. And then sometimes you still don't feel it because now you got it pulling the other direction. So what you actually have to do is take a pry bar between the lower control arm and the knuckle and pry it and pull it up and down, and you'll see how much play is in that socket and ball.
And so there is a certain amount of travel that's acceptable, and it's not something that if you haven't looked at them 100 times that you may even know the difference between what's acceptable and what's dangerous.
That's correct, because you can take a brand new car and you're going to have a little bit of play, but you just have to know from experience, which we've got, and you'll know what's dangerous and what's not.
And thank you for saying that. So if you will, since you touched on the experience on the different makes that you're working on, let's give them a little bit of a history lesson of Preferred Auto Care and how many years you've been doing this on these specific makes.
We've been here in Sparks for over 21 years now, and we have a year in California, which, nah.
But here on Gregg Street.
Yes, on Gregg Street, Rock and Gregg.
Kind of across the street from the Baldini's gas station.
Yeah, which is now Golden Gate.
Golden Gate, okay. And you've been there for decades working on these makes. We had this conversation before about how important it would be to have somebody that specializes in the make of your vehicle, that has knowledge of your vehicle, actually perform these inspections, and share a little bit of your belief and why.
Well, we specialize on the vehicles, and we know the common problems with them, so we know more what to look for. If we're doing a vehicle inspection, if say a Toyota Corolla's got a common problem, as we're doing the inspection, that's one of the places we're really going to inspect, because we know that this is a potential failure.
And that varies from year to year and model to model within each manufacturer. So having the years of experience on each of those makes gives you the ability to really save some people catastrophic failures that would have been inexpensive to repair had they caught them sooner.
That's true.
And of course, then their safety as well. So this inspection process that we're talking about, that we're recommending people do, it's the same inspection you would do for somebody who brought you a car, say that they were interested in buying, and that they wanted to have an inspection performed on it, or somebody that was going to sell their car. And I talk about these because a lot of people don't really consider this before they sell their car, the value of doing a pre-sale inspection, as they would if they did a pre-purchase inspection before they bought one. When you take to a consumer an inspection that's interested in your car and say, look, I took it in to make sure I was selling you an honest car, and this is what the inspection found. If it's an authentically good car, it can help you sell it. And if there is anything, you can either disclose it or have it fixed if it's minor, so you can show them that that's the kind of car and the type of person that is selling it to them. But let's take a minute and talk about this 100,000-mile inspection and what it costs and what you do for them in this process.
Well, we charge $50 for a complete vehicle inspection, and we'll go over the whole entire car, check all the suspension components, the ball joints, brakes, struts, belts, condition of the oil. We'll take the oil cap off, look down inside the engine. If it's all gunked up, that means the people didn't properly maintain their engine. Check the cooling system, the fans, heating, air conditioning, power windows, lights. It's bumper to bumper. One thing we don't do on most vehicles is a compression check. All the newer vehicles, if there's a compression problem, that engine light's going to come on. And then in some cases, it's 3 hours labor just to replace the plugs. Well, you can't do a $50 inspection and spend 4 hours working on a car.
Right, but you also then road test them. And what types of things are you inspecting when you're on a road test in them?
Pulls, vibrations, brake vibrations, anything unusual.
Shifting issues.
Shifting, the quality of the transmission, if it's shifting smooth like it's supposed to. Is it upshifting too soon? Does it have a harsh downshift? Lots of times a lot of the Hondas are notorious for broken motor mounts. Most people, after they drive the car for a while, they don't even know they're broken because they get so used to it. It happens slowly over a period of time. Well, when all three motor mounts break, you can really feel the engine rock around in there.
And then, there's other things too, like you'll check the air conditioning and how cold it's blowing and whether or not it's cycling too often.
Yeah, that by all means. It's kind of rough to do in the wintertime sometimes, but yes, we check all that stuff.
So the cost of this is really economical.
It's $50.
$50. And I think one of the interesting things is you shared with me, if somebody brings you a car that they're interested in buying, and again, let's go over those makes one more time for our listeners.
The Honda, Toyota, Acura, Lexus, and Subarus.
So if somebody's out looking at one of these and they want to have an inspection of one and they bring you one and they pay you $50 and you say, this is not a car worthy of your purchase, or here's your estimate, and they determine it's not worthy of their purchase, that you don't charge them to bring a second car to you.
Yeah, I charge them the original $50, then I tell them if you want to bring over another car, I'll look at it for free.
So you're really committed to helping our consumers purchase a proper car as well as keeping their current vehicle running properly.
Yeah, I feel kind of guilty charging somebody $50 for a car that's worthless.
Well, that just talks about who you are as an individual and a member of our community and how you feel about conducting business and treating people. And again, that's the reason why you're not just a guest on our show, but a frequent guest. We're really trying to bring the educational knowledge of our community up to a level where they know what the standard is, they know what's available to them, and they stop accepting anything shy of that type of a commitment. If you will, take a minute and talk about what it goes into the quality of your repairs and even the part selection process.
Personally, I think the best quality is start with quality parts. I mean, you start with quality parts, you should get as many miles on that part as it did from the original part. You know, we've seen it so many times. Well, yeah, if you put in a part that's not very good quality, what happens is it gets them out of warranty. But shoot, if you're getting 60, 80,000 miles on a part and all of a sudden you're replacing it every 20, that has no value whatsoever.
Well, the labor will eat you alive, and it would have been cheaper to have bought the proper part to begin with and only done it once every 80,000. And so how do you one of the things that we had talked about on a prior show, but I don't think our FM listeners have had a chance to hear this yet, is the OEM conversation. And describe what OEM means and what you use.
OEM means original equipment manufacturer. And what there's companies that will go directly to the manufacturers and purchase them and repackage them. And what they're identical parts, but they're not in the factory wrapper. And that's OEM. Or OEM is also the factory parts right out of the factory wrapper. It's
purchased directly from the factory, and they can be a few dollars more, but the same exact part ultimately.
Yeah, well, what happens lots of times is you end up paying more for the part that's actually in the factory wrapper than what you do the OEM wrapper. And now, not all OEM parts are available in every part, so.
Right, and I think it was really interesting. I was in your shop one day and you were showing me a component where it was the original factory part. In order to be an OEM non-factory part, they actually had ground down the logo on it.
Yeah, they've ground down the logo. We've actually gotten them in, and somehow they forgot to grind off the factory's name. So
the original equipment manufacturer would represent that it was built by the company that built that part. It's under the same assembly process as they did originally for that manufacturer. And Tom, how do they get a hold of you? And again, the location of your shop and website, et cetera.
We're at 1705 Gregg Street in Sparks. Our phone number is 355-7033. You could also visit our website at preferredautoreno.com.
And again, that's Tom O'Donnell with Preferred Auto Care in Reno. And you can find them on our preferred business page at thecarbuyeradvisor.com. And you can listen to his prior interviews and get to know Tom and his facility and their capabilities personally by clicking the YouTube link on their listing on our website. And you can listen to all the past interviews. Share them with your friends on Facebook as well. That's, again, Tom O'Donnell, Preferred Auto Care. Thanks for being here with us again today.
Thank you, Mitch.